Thank you. So I was asked to give a kind of a general talk, maybe representing the people's interest in the particular subject of this program. So I am not sure I will represent the people's interest. I will describe my own interest in the subject. So it's very much related to the theory of motifs. We have chosen this title of Topology of Algebraic Varieties. So it's very ambiguous title because an algebraic variety usually it has several topologies. So Zariski topology, the Étale topology, and if we are C, there is the complex topology. And so together with these various topologies, we have various cohomology theories. And the idea of Grothendieck to introduce the motifs is that we should construct something inside algebraic geometry, which has several realization in terms of cohomology. And that common body inside algebraic geometry would explain the various comparison results that we have between the various cohomology theories. So, but today my talk will be much more concrete. I will explain only one aspect of these ideas, namely the relation, or conjectural relation between algebraic cycles. Algebraic cycles, it is definitely inside algebraic geometry, so very much this is the heart of the motif, and on the complex geometric side, the theory of Hodge structures. So this subject has a very old history, because it starts with the Abel theorem. On divisors, on curves. So what I call a curve, I mean a smooth, complex projective curve. But if you prefer, you can think to it as a compact Riemann surface. And now, if you have a rational function, so non-zero rational function, which from the complex analytic side is the same as a non-zero meromorphic function. Then we can associate its divisor, which is what we call a zero cycle on the curve. A zero cycle is just, by definition, it's a sum, a finite sum of points with integer or integral multiplicities. We can even say that this zero cycle will be of degree 0. The degree is the sum of the multiplicities which appear, and this divisor is simply obtained by counting the zeros and the poles of F. Of course, with their multiplicities. So you take a positive multiplicities for the zeros and negative multiplicities for the poles. And the Abel's theorem answers the following question: the characterization. So the zero cycles of degree 0 which can be which are of the form divisor of a meromorphic function. So this is the notation, the algebraic geometry notation for the field of rational functions. And the answer is the following. So it's this Abel theorem. So it's very beautiful because it contains some topology. Your cycle Z is the divisor of a rational function if and only if there exists a path gamma in your Riemann surface sigma with a boundary equal to Z. So boundary again, the path is oriented. The boundary, of course, you count the multiplicities of the end point, such that the integral over gamma of eta is 0 for any holomorphic one form on C. So here it's H0 of omega C. So these are simply the global holomorphic one forms on C or on this Riemann surface. So maybe, well, that looks too artisanal. There is a better way of understanding this statement, which is as follows. So you consider So you consider your Riemann surface. So now I insist on the fact that I am on the complex analytic side, and you consider a cohomology with a complex coefficient. Okay. So it is represented by closed one forms with complex coefficients, and inside this you have the subspace of cohomology classes of holomorphic one form. So holomorphic one forms are closed on a Riemann surface, or any projective variety, in fact. So you have this space H10, which is H0 of omega sigma. And so now you can consider the integral, sorry, I should keep this, the integral homology of your surface, Riemann surface sigma. And of course, so it is a dual to this. You can integrate forms on these closed contours. But in particular, you can restrict to the space of holomorphic one form. So that maps naturally here in this space. So just by, so if you have a contour gamma, you will associate the linear form of integration over gamma. So the image is called the periods. Okay. And so you get a quotient, which is in fact a compact torus. And now, if you start from your Z here, you can do the following. So you have your Z, which is of degree 0. So I didn't say it, but here the sigma is supposed to be connected, so it is of degree 0. You can write your Z as a boundary of some path gamma. A priori, it's you choose it arbitrarily. And now it turns out that so you, of course, you can consider the integral over gamma, which is something which belongs to. Okay, you integrate only holomorphic forms. Okay. And now the point is that because holomorphic forms are closed, so if you change this gamma, they depend, this integral, they depends only on the homotopy tape of your path. And if you add to gamma some contour with no boundary, then the resulting integral here will become the sum of the original one plus this, which by definition is a period. So the conclusion is that if you consider this, in fact, it depends on gamma. But now if you go to the quotient, modulo the period, you get something which is well defined. And of course, a more elegant way of rephrasing this Abel's theorem is saying your Z is the divisor of a global of a rational non-zero rational function on C, if and only if this element here vanishes in this complex torus. Okay. So, what is remarkable in this result is that on the left we have something which is defined purely using algebraic geometry. You consider the zero cycles on your curve, and you mod out by a subgroup which is defined by algebraic geometry. And on the right, what you see is something which is in fact a very transcendental object. Which is in fact very much related to the so this T, this complex torus here. It's in fact it's a data. It's equivalent to the Hodge, so-called Hodge structure, which is a Hodge structure of weight 1 on the cohomology of your Riemann surface. So this integral cohomology, of course, it depends only on the topology of your Riemann surface. It does not depend on the complex structure. What will determine the Hodge structure is precisely, it will depend on the complex structure, is the following data. So now you are interested in the cohomology with a complex coefficient, and the Hodge structure will be determined by the data of the subspace of classes of holomorphic one-fourth. It's an important fact that, and this is the reason why we have a compact complex torus above, is the fact that the cohomology of your Riemann surface is the direct sum of this subspace H10 plus H10. It's a complex conjugate. It's something which can be generalized to a higher dimension. So, of course, for this example, one could say, well, I did something very complicated to construct, to pass through topology and construct this complex torus. In fact, there are methods, direct methods from inside algebraic geometry to construct this torus, which turns out to be not a general complex torus, but an abelian variety that is a projective complex torus. So there are methods to construct this torus inside algebraic geometry. But I don't think this is the right thing to do, because I will see in higher degree what we have. It is not an algebraic an object from algebraic geometry like this Albanese variety. It's just the Hodge structure with its very transcendental aspect. So what I want to explain is precisely what happens for any smooth projective variety, complex variety, and in any degree, and what we would like to do. So now, so I have this group of zero cycles modulo so-called linear equivalence. That is the subgroup of zero cycles which are globally the divisor of a rational function. And the generalization is immediate, so they are called Chow groups. So in this, in fact, for this talk, I am only interested in two Chow groups with Q coefficients. So maybe I put a Q and I will forget it after that. So X is a smooth complex projective. And I will consider the group of I cycles. Maybe I should put a tensor Q. Okay, so this is just a cycle is just a sum sigma of Ni Zi, where the Ni will be in Q and the Zi. Sorry, the I is not good. Okay. And these are closed irreducible subsets, or if you like, algebraic subvarieties. Of X of dimension G. Okay, so this is a group of. Of course, it's much too big, and we want to mod out this group by. Sorry.
J or I.
Sorry. The dimension is I. Okay, so. Now, inside this group, we construct the subgroup of cycles which are rationally equivalent to 0. Okay, and by definition, it will be generated as follows, so generated over Q by so for each W to X. So let's think this as an inclusion. I would prefer the W to be normal, but it's the detail. Okay. Here it's an algebraic variety. Everything is projective, and I ask that it is of dimension I plus 1. I choose F, rational non-zero rational function. Okay. So this F has a divisor. Here that it's better to assume that the W is normal. So again, the divisor is that you look at the locus that form hypersurfaces in W, where F vanishes or as poles, and you count the vanishing positively and the poles negatively. So, and this divisor of F, well, a priori it's an I cycle in W, but you just push it to X. Well, usually it's preferable to take a normalization here, if so it's just a detail. So this will be the generators for rational equivalence. And the group, the Chow groups will be, by definition, these groups here. So this is the algebraic geometry side, and very clearly I just did in arbitrary dimension what we did with zero cycles on curves. So. And now the other, from the point of view of complex geometry, So now the other side is the notion of a Hodge structure on cohomology. So my X, I am over C. I look at it as a complex analytic manifold with its topology, and I consider now the so-called Betti cohomology. So I write X again. In the curve case, I use the notation C and sigma to distinguish the algebraic geometry object and the analytic object, but here I pay not too much attention to that. So this is the complex, manifold associated to X, and I consider it's a Betti cohomology. Okay, and of course this is again only topological, but now you can consider the cohomology with complex coefficients. So, it's a little less topological in the sense that cohomology with complex coefficients, you can compute it using differential forms. And because of this, we have the so-called Hodge decomposition. Which splits this space into the direct sum of complex subspaces, HPQ of X, which are defined as a set of cohomology classes of closed PQ forms. So of course, it depends very much on the complex structure of X, because this is the complex structure determines the decomposition of forms into their complex tape, and so this is of course the position of this HPQ will depend on that decomposition. So there is an extra information which is part of the notion of a Hodge structure, that if you consider the complex conjugate of this space, this is the same as the HQP of X. So, well, in the data of a Hodge structure, what is very transcendental is a cohomology with integral coefficient. It's a thing that we are not able to construct using only the algebraic geometry. With other coefficients, the situation is different. This space, for example, we can compute it using only the complex algebraic variety X, because we have the notion of algebraic forms, hypercohomology, etc. So this space, in some sense, we can say it is algebraic. Here, in the Hodge decomposition, I would say part of it is algebraic in the sense that the associated Hodge filtration, it comes from algebraic geometry. We can really understand it using only the X as an algebraic variety. What is not algebraic is the direct sum decomposition. Okay, so in any case, these objects starting from so I said for I equal 1, the Hodge structure that we have, in some sense, we can understand them using algebraic geometry, because they correspond to certain algebraic tori. But for higher weight Hodge structures, that is an object like this. So here we have this. This is just a lattice. Maybe forget about the torsion. So it's called weight I, Hodge structure on cohomology of degree I. So we have this lattice and this Hodge decomposition satisfying Hodge symmetry on the corresponding vector space. And there is no object from algebraic geometry which is associated to the Hodge structure of weight at least 2. And what is worse, due to the Griffiths transversality, what is known is that most Hodge structures do not come from algebraic geometry. So the ones that you can get as Hodge structure of algebraic varieties, they form really a small subset. So there are some exceptions, a very small number of exceptions to that, like K3 surfaces, where we get all possible Hodge structures. But in general, these objects are very hard to interpret because we don't even know which one comes from algebraic geometry. And the general question is which would so now we want to more or less to generalize this Abel theorem on zero cycles of curves. And the question is basically relate the Chow groups. So maybe I should say maybe the size of Chow groups to the size or maybe complexity of the Hodge structures. So, of course, it's for a given x. That is, I look at all the Hodge structures. So that is, for each degree, I get a Hodge structure of the same of this weight, and so we look at them, and we want to say something on the Chow groups. In fact, there is a notion of size or complexity for a Hodge structure. It's very simple. It is given by the notion of coniveau or niveau. So when you consider your Hodge structure, say of weight k, so you have your lattice and or maybe it's over Q, so the Q vector space, and the corresponding complex vector space has this decomposition into PQ as a direct sum of PQ spaces. Okay. With this Hodge symmetry condition. And so what happens in general, of course, is that your Hodge decomposition will be like this. That is, you will have all possible PQ terms. And in that case, we will say that the niveau is k, and the co-niveau is 0. But in some cases, it's possible that your decomposition is smaller. That is, it takes the form LC okay. For some integer r, so instead of starting with the first term, we'll start only at the r plus 1 term, and of course this one is different from 0. And then we will say that r is the co-niveau of L and of the Hodge structure. And the niveau is just k minus 2r. So what is this niveau? It's simply the idea that when you have this Hodge structure, in fact, you can shift all the by degrees by r. So you can think to this as being L prime. Just a shift in the indices. Okay. So this Hodge structure, it is of course officially it is of a weight k, but you should think of it as the so-called tête twist of Hodge structure, which has weight k minus 2r. So that's a niveau, kind of a true weight. So this is the notion that we have for the complexity of Hodge structure, and we know since Mumford, he had many followers, and that we have an implication like this, that is assumptions on Chow groups implies restrictions on the niveau or coniveau. So I don't want to give the general statement, but just let me give two examples of such a statement. So the first result was due to the Mumford. So it is the follow. It says the following. So again, X is a smooth projective. And the assumption is only on CH0. That is, you just look at CH0, it's just a point, 0 cycles. And the assumption is that the CH0 is equal to Z. So Z, you cannot avoid this Z, it's given by the degree. But saying that CH0 of X is Z is just saying that any 2 points are rationally equivalent in your X. And the conclusion is that hi0 of X is equal to 0 for any I, positive I. And so there is an ad hoc proof. He's proving that there are no holomorphic forms of positive degree on the X, and he does this in a rather explicit way. But if you want to state his result in a slightly more abstract way, what he is saying is that all by using this definition, maybe it's a little poor, but in fact it's a very useful notion. All Hodge structures on hi of X, you need to consider positive I, are of coniveau at least 1. So now I pass. I give you another example of a statement in the same spirit. So I should mention that. So the proof by Mumford was very explicit, ad hoc, but later on, in the 80s, Bloch and Srinivas, they gave a very elegant proof of the Mumford result, which, well, it's the same result, but the proof was actually in a very different spirit. And then, using the same scheme of same idea, there have been a generalization of this Mumford result by many people. So I should mention maybe Lewis, Baron P, schön. Okay. And then the assumption that we have in the Mumford theorem is just an assumption on CH0. These people, they make an assumption not only on CH0, but also CH0 and CH1, for example. You assume that you have nothing except for the cohomology class. Then the conclusion that conivo 1 will be replaced by conivo 2, etc., etc. And finally, and if you the extreme case is the following result, which is due to Lewis. That now you assume that all the Chow groups are trivial in the sense that you have only the cycle class, the cohomology class, something that you cannot avoid in any case. So assume. So here let's consider the cycle class in homology. So it's to each z, to each subvariety of dimension I, you associate its fundamental homology class here, and this is easily seen to factor through rational equivalence. So assume that this is called the cycle class is injective. Then the cohomology of X is of niveau 0. So what does that mean, niveau 0, if you think that this is in fact equivalent to the fact that, first of all, you need, of course, K to be even. And your Hodge structure is entirely of type, so 2K prime. And your Hodge structure is entirely of type K prime, K prime. In fact, the same proof gives even more. It is generated by algebraic cycles. Okay. And in between, you have a series of similar statements. I mean, between the Mumford theorem and this one, you have similar statements where you make assumption only on Chow groups up to a certain range. And in fact, one can summarize the main open questions in the theory of algebraic cycles for complex algebraic varieties by saying that they are just the converse to these kinds of statements. So, okay. For example, the first, if you consider the Mumford theorem, the converse was essentially asked by Bloch. So you consider X again a smooth projective over C, and you assume that it has no holomorphic forms of positive degree. Then CH0 of X should be Z. Here there is this particular feature for zero cycles that we know that they have this group has no torsion, assuming there is no Albanese variety. So usually conjectures about algebraic cycles they concern the cycles of a tensor Q. But okay, so this is the Bloch conjecture. So even for surfaces, it's still unknown. But there are some progress. there is a very big difference between the case of dimension 1 and higher dimension. Because dimension 1, when you have a curve, you know, there is this geometric classification. Genus 0, you know, it's P1. There is it has no holomorphic form, but furthermore, it's P1, so it's obvious that any 2 points are rationally equivalent. You can write explicitly a rational function. And then genus 1, you have the elliptic curves, and then higher genus. So what I want to say is that in dimension 1, just giving the genus, that is a number of holomorphic forms, you know the geometric shape of your object. But starting from dimension 2, the situation is very different because we have the so-called Kodaira, the classification by the Kodaira dimension, where you have, for example, Kodaira dimension minus infinity. It's known essentially that this is a rational surfaces, and then you may have ruled surfaces, etc., etc. And the point is that you may have surfaces of Kodaira dimension 2, that is basically this kind of a positivity condition which makes them like hyperbolic curves, but which have no holomorphic forms. So this conjecture becomes very, very hard because what this says that if there is no holomorphic forms of positive degree, then this conjecture predicts that all points are rationally equivalent. And we would like to believe that this is saying that the surface contains a lot of rational curves. But this is absolutely not the case. It is just saying that all points are rationally equivalent, but the rational equivalence, it is not produced by moving points along rational curves. So that makes the conjecture quite hard to prove. And again, so similar to this series of statements, you have the series of converse, and at the end, you get that the following conjecture. Let X be a variety whose cohomology has a niveau 0. That means, as I explained, you have only Hodge classes. Or if you prefer only cohomology of type KK, then the cycle class map is injective. So this cycle class map is the one which is written here for all. So what I would like to explain, it's all very difficult, and the progress on this conjecture is very small. What I would like to explain is that somehow there is a way of splitting these problems into 2 parts. And one part So part 1, in fact, it's simply related to the Hodge conjecture and its generalization, which is much more important, in fact, due to Grothendieck, which is known as the generalized Hodge conjecture or the Grothendieck Hodge conjecture. So, for example, typically, the first step here in this conjecture is we have the assumption that your X has a cohomology of niveau 0. This is saying that all the cohomology is made of Hodge classes, that is a rational end of type KK. So, consider this case. Then we will need the Hodge conjecture to say that to say that the cohomology of X is generated over Q by cycle classes. So I will explain why this is useful. So this is the case of niveau 0. Let me also, so here we just need the Hodge conjecture because we only have Hodge classes. Now, as I have explained, there are many other interesting conjectures. This one is maybe very particular in comparison. Here, consider this example where our assumption is that the cohomology of X So suppose we consider the case where you have these assumptions. So this is saying that the coniveau of the cohomology of positive degree of X is at least 1. So this is the Hodge coniveau. And then there is this Grothendieck-Hodge conjecture. So it is saying in that case that there exists a hypersurface in X, which is necessarily singular, in fact. Okay, it's a projective hypersurface such that the cohomology of X, of positive degree, of course, is supported on Y. That is, it vanishes on the complementary open set. Okay. So that is really the most important conjecture, much more than the Hodge conjecture itself, which is a particular case. So the Grothendieck-Hodge conjecture, I just stated it in the case of coniveau 1, but there is an analog for any coniveau. So this is one part, and now I explain the second part, which has nothing to do with Hodge structures. It's only algebraic cycles, and I will explain why this first step is important. So kind of a second step. This is a conjecture on algebraic cycles, which is called the nilpotence conjecture. And for this, to state it, I will need the notion of correspondence and the composition of correspondences. So if you have X and Y, two varieties, and a correspondence between X and Y, it is just an algebraic cycle. C'est modulo rational equivalence in the product X cross Y. So this is very important because this is really maybe the main idea in the theory of motifs is that you should, there are not enough morphisms in algebraic geometry, and the good notion of morphisms is given by algebraic cycles in the product, because there are many more and they are more significant. So we have this notion of correspondences, and they can be composed because well, we have an intersection theory on these groups, and so now if you have a z in CH of x cross y, so I do not write the codimension, it's a little painful, and t in CH of y cross z. Then t composed with z, you will do the following. So here's the projection to the product x cross z, okay. And then you have your projection to xy. You pull back your cycle z. You intersect with a pullback of cycle t. Okay, and you push. So if the z are just the graph of ordinary map, then the composed cycle is just the graph of the composition. And because of this, the existence of this composition, plus good properties that it has, you find that in particular, CH x cross x has a ring structure. And the nilpotence conjecture is as follows. So if z is a self-correspondence, so again x is smooth projective, and z is a self-correspondence which is homologous to 0. Then it is nilpotent for this ring structure. For some n that we do not control necessarily. So let me show you how, for example, so consider. No, it's not here. Okay. This conjecture. So let me explain how it follows from the Hodge conjecture plus the nilpotent conjecture. So maybe call it conjecture B, and no, here everything is only conjecture, so it's not actually a result. It's just to say that really in this conjecture B, you have actually two different problems. So the conjecture B follows from a Hodge conjecture plus nilpotence conjecture. And this is as follows. So under this assumption, we know that the cohomology is generated by Hodge classes, and the Hodge conjecture, it will say that the cohomology is generated by classes of algebraic cycles. And so now this implies that now in x cross x, you can consider the class of the diagonal. Okay. It has a Q-net decomposition like this. So these are cohomology classes coming from X. But if we have the Hodge conjecture, these classes, they are classes of algebraic cycles. And finally, you can write your class of the diagonal as something like this, sigma of maybe a unit, now some coefficient, beta I G, ZI, ZI, maybe something like this. And so where the I are cycles on X. And so this is saying that your cycle gamma, which is defined as the difference delta X minus sigma of beta Ig, the I cross the J, is cohomologous to 0. And to this gamma, you can apply the nilpotence conjecture. So the nilpotence conjecture will say that this gamma, the high power is 0 in CH X cross X. And now this is finished because now your cycle gamma, it acts as the identity on cycles homologous to 0. Here I didn't say it. The interest of correspondences is that they act on cycles. So if you have a gamma in CH X cross Y, there is a gamma lower star from CHX to CHY, which does which maps a cycle alpha to Py lower star of Px upper star alpha intersected with gamma. So now it's immediate from the form that we have here. It's a diagonal. It's like the identity, and the action of cycles which are decomposable. It's very easy to see that it is 0 on cycles which are homologous to 0. And the conclusion is that the gamma, it acts as a diagonal, so as the identity on cycles homologous to 0. And because it is nilpotent, you conclude that the identity of the space of cycles homologous to 0 is nilpotent, and this implies that so this implies that CH of X, the space of cycles homologous to 0, is 0. And I should stop. Maybe I can add a few words about this nilpotence conjecture. In fact, so this nilpotence conjecture so it is known for cycles algebraically equivalent to 0. Here, a priori, the conjecture is for cycles homologous to 0, algebraically equivalent to 0. That means essentially that they are of the form so zt minus zt prime, where you have a whole family like this, parameterized by a connected curve, and you consider the difference of two fibers. You will say that this is a cycle algebraically equivalent to 0. Well, you consider the relation generated by this. So this is a result which is due to independently an old result, and it's very easy to Vojevodsky and myself about very long time ago. It's not very useful because, in fact, the cycles that we meet in this theory, they have no reason to be algebraically equivalent to 0. But maybe more importantly, there are the results of the ideas due to Kimura. That implies in particular that the nilpotence conjecture is true for those varieties X dominated by products of curves. Well, it's only a particular statement. He has a very beautiful notion of a very, very beautiful idea of finite dimensionality of motifs. This is completely formal. When you have a motif, so I gave him more or less an idea of what are the morphisms in the motifs. There are these cycles. And there are operations on motifs. You can take a product of motifs. And in particular, you can consider exterior products or symmetric products of motifs. And Kimura proves that if a motif is finite dimensional, in the sense that for example, some exterior product vanishes, like a finite dimensional vector space, some exterior power will vanish, then it satisfies the nilpotence conjecture. So it's really very beautiful, formal, but very beautiful. I will stop here.
Thank you very